Action figure reboots. Sponsored by Pearson Art.
Hello, and welcome back. Today we're looking at Mego Tarzan, first introduced in 1974 as part of the world's greatest superhero lineup. At the time, I thought it was an odd choice that Mego picked this character. I would have liked to have seen maybe a Green Lantern or the Flash, but looking back, I should have had a little bit more respect for the character. He was created in 1912 by Edgar Rice Burroughs, who inadvertently probably made one of the best business deals of the 20th century. He was a pencil sharpener salesman and not very successful. He had a wife and two small kids. And part of his job was to proofread the magazines that the pencil sharpeners were advertised in to make sure there were no misprints or anything like that. And one of them was All Story Magazine. Magazines back then used to print a lot of short stories. There were ones that had different genres in it, maybe Western, love stories, mystery, etc. And he took these magazines home and he read them. And he really didn't like what he saw. And he thought to himself, maybe I can come up with something better. So he wrote a story and sent it in. It was called Under the Moon of Mars. He used the pseudonym Norman Bean. And a few months went by, he didn't hear anything. He got a little discouraged. But finally, one day he got a letter with a contract and an offer of $400, a fortune in those days. But at the end of the contract, there was a line at the bottom that said, "We retain all rights." And what that meant was that the publisher could publish that story as many times as they wanted, but he would only get paid once. And he didn't think that was fair. So he withdrew the offer. But the publisher liked it so much that he said, just scratch that line out. And scratch it out he did, and cashed the check. And the story was published in this very magazine. And 101 years later, that story was finally made into a movie called John Carter. Because Under the Moon of Mars wasn't a short story, it was a longer book. It was serialized, so they would publish a chapter a month. So it took a while. In the meantime, Edgar Rice Burroughs worked on his second story, sent that in, and it was immediately accepted under the same conditions. When Tarzan of the Apes first appeared, it was an immediate hit, and because of the agreement he had with the publisher, he owned that character lock, stock, and barrel. And once the story was done being serialized in All Story magazine, it went on to be published as a book in 1914. And after that, a star was born. Tarzan at the time became the first multimedia star. In addition to the books, there was product tie-ins, movies, comic strips, comic books, radio shows, live action shows, cartoons, and way too much merchandise to list. Ever since he was created in 1912, there hasn't been one decade that's passed where there hasn't been at least one Tarzan project that was produced. No other fictional character can claim that mantle, not even Sherlock Holmes. So, because of Edgar Rice Burroughs' stubbornness, for lack of a better word, and a scratched out line, he was able to build an empire that still exists to this day. So, I would say that deserves a little respect. But I didn't know any better, I was just a kid. So, with that being said, let's begin. Even though I thought that there were other characters that could be produced that were, I don't know, a little bit cooler looking than Tarzan, I still never had any problem with the figure. I always thought the head sculpt was really good. It was just the suit that he wore that was a little off putting. It wasn't so much the flesh colored bodysuit. I kind of get why they had to do that. The early bodies that Mego used weren't really conducive to this kind of a figure. Dude didn't wear a shirt. If they didn't use the flesh colored bodysuit, it would have looked something like this. So I understand the need for the bodysuit. And that didn't even really bother me that much. It was the loincloth that he wore. The movies that were shown when I was a kid were most of the Johnny Weissmuller films. And he always just had a brown loincloth. And even the movies that were made after he was done playing Tarzan, they kind of wore that uniform too. So this loincloth that he wore, I just didn't get it. Not to mention on the box, he kind of is wearing some kind of cheetah skin, and it didn't look like that either. Not to mention the shoulder piece. That's actually a separate piece on that loincloth. Wouldn't it have been easier just to make the loincloth on the box brown and just give him brown trunks? 'Cause I don't know if that's supposed to be a cheetah design. I have no idea. So I'm going to get rid of all that. For this reboot, I'm just going to use the head. I picked this one up off of eBay, and it looks good from this angle, but there are some paint rubs in the back that have to be addressed. So I modified it a bit, and that's what I came up with. As you can see, I didn't do much. I repainted the hair, and I figured while I was at it, I might as well do the eyebrows as well. They were a little faded, so I finished it off. You could use the standard Mego body for this figure, but I'm just going to use the hands. For the body itself, I'm going to go with this Fonzie figure. It's the same one that I used when I did the Conan the Barbarian a couple episodes back. As I said in that video, I think this is much better for characters who don't wear a shirt, so I'm going to go with this one. For the trunks, I picked these up from Dr.Mego's reproductions. They're supposed to be for Conan the Barbarian, but I think they work much better for Tarzan. The color, the texture, I think it works better, so I'm going to use these. I'll leave a link in the description for his site. All right, we got all the parts, as few as there are. Let's put it together and see what we got. All right, I like this. This is a Tarzan that I'm used to. I like the trunks. I think the body's right. I think this combination works. I guess there's not really much you could say about this figure because there's really nothing to it. Once you get past the body and the trunks, there's not much more to go with. I will say I really do like the head sculpt though. As I said earlier, I think it's the best part of the whole figure, and I really like that I'm using it on mine. Even though the body looks a little bit more modern, even though it's not, I think the head still gives it that vintage look, and that's a good thing. So I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, share, comment. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, always remember and never forget, think outside the box.